Hello everybody, my name is One Red Line on the Discords. Some of you may know me, others may not. The past few weeks since the MRC release, I've had a number of people ask me about my list for Nico. So today I'm going to do something I don't normally do and record a little video to show you guys what my list is, talk to you a little bit about my thought process as I was developing it, and some of the things that I've encountered as I've been working on it, testing it at locals, and just kind of communicating with other people who are playing similar lists. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we start with Serene Spirit of Water. This card is very strong in our Nico deck, namely because of the Recover 6 that you get off of it. Because Nico is a water champion, releasing this from your lineage does not actually punish you at all. You can continue to play your water cards without any problems, and it's really awesome. The other benefit we get from it is the glimpse. Yes, you start with a smaller hand size, but being able to glimpse your first 6 cards out of the deck is immensely important because of the number and types of cards that we're running in this deck. We need to see a couple of pieces in our opening hand or not see a couple of pieces in our opening hand in order to safely be able to progress through the game, get past the early game without too much issue, and go into Nico with everything we need on board and in place to get rolling and hopefully mill our opponent for big numbers. So as I talk about some of the other cards in the deck, we'll talk about whether or not those are priorities for staying in our opening hand, how many we really want to see, and whether or not we should pitch those or search for those. So next up we have Tristan 1. Now this is a little bit of a weird play here. So Tristan 1 is obviously Assassin, so we won't get any Guardian class bonus activated for any of our cards that require that from us. However, the thing that I absolutely love about this card is that you get to choose between either gaining a prep counter, which is worthless for this deck, we don't do that ever, or you can take Agility 3. Now let me explain why Agility 3 is amazing. So turn 1, you get your Spirit out, you get your starting hand, you see Icebound Slam in your starting hand. Turn 2, you can take out GCR, pop that, and then Icebound Slam. Well, let's say for your draw for turn, you pulled another Icebound Slam. What are you going to do about that? So you can actually use Tristan 1 to basically be able to play Icebound Slam at full cost, no problem. If they have no blockers out, you can just smack them for 8 damage, mill yourself for 5 cards, set up a ton of floating memory, and then pick up 3 cards. Now, why is it important that you're picking up 3 cards? Well, because of the fact that Frostbind, Fracturize, most of your defensive pieces, all of the interaction that you're going to be wanting to utilize costs 2, plus the card out of your hand, so that's your interaction. If you used Float to pay for Tristan, you can Icebound Slam again on turn 3, get out 16 damage at the very start of the game, and set yourself up to be in an amazing position. So it's very, very strong. I think it's much stronger than Tony. We don't need Taunt at all. You could go with Lorraine, I've seen on a lot of decks. We don't really need swords because the whole goal of this deck is getting a lot of lash counters once you're at Nico and just milling your opponent out that way. So I've been really loving Tristan in this deck. Agility is amazing. It makes a lot of your plays feel a lot stronger. So of course, I've been talking all this time about Nico. Of course, we're going to go into Nico. Now, Nico is amazing. Whenever a floating memory card is banished from your graveyard, she's going to get a lash counter on her. And then if she hits an enemy champion, she will actually mill the opponent for a number of cards equal to the lash counters. And when I say mill, I think most TCG players know that means discarding the top card off of their deck. So in Grand Archive, if you run out of cards in your deck, the next time you would draw a card, you lose the game. So if you can mill your opponent's entire deck out, pass turn to them, they start their turn and they lose. So it's extremely, extremely great. It's a lot of fun too. You know, I've milled opponents for crazy numbers. Yesterday I milled a Sylvie player for 46 cards and they had 41 left in their deck. So they basically died once I passed my turn. So now we'll move on to the Regalia. Currently I'm running Grand Crusader's Ring. I like comboing this a little bit with being able to get out an early Icebound Slam, or you can use it to trigger Scepter of Lumina to banish it to draw 2 cards. It's very effective. I think it's not a priority in this deck. You could probably swap it out for another Divine Relic such as Temporal Spectrometer, which would make it very easy for you to get to level 2 without sacrificing any of your floating memory. You could utilize the Quicksilver Grail to protect your Magebane Lash and kind of set it up so that you're able to banish exactly whatever card you're wanting out of your memory, or just to hold off on it until you get enough float in your graveyard so that you're able to pop off your combo in the same turn. But I like GCR. I mean, it's been my favorite Divine Relic since I started playing the game, when it was the only Divine Relic. So I'm one of those folks who really likes drawing cards. I played a lot of Erupting for a long time, so GCR just makes me feel good inside. Speaking of Scepter of Lumina, we're running Scepter of Lumina. Now, there's a little bit of nuance to this card. You know, you'll see it a lot in like a Water Diana list or something like that. She gets a lot more value out of the first effect of Scepter of Lumina, which is whenever your champion levels up, you can deal 4 damage to the enemy champion. So because we don't go to level 3, there's no potential for us to get 12 damage out of this. I personally like materializing this as soon as possible. It only costs 1 memory or float to play it, and if you're able to get 4 damage, 8 damage off of it as you're leveling up, great. If not, it's worth 2 cards. It's phenomenal. One of my favorite things to do is materialize this, pre-recollection, pay down 5, banish it, draw 2 cards, immediately Icebound Slam my opponent. It's an awesome early game play. It can set you up for amazing plays later on, and every point of damage that we're able to get across to our opponent just means that they're going to mill even more cards later once we hit Nico and get our combo rolling. So next we have Smoke Bombs. So because Nico's mill effect is on champion hit and Ravishing Lash is also on champion hit, Ravishing Finale, is on champion hit, you have to be able to get past blockers. That's one of the things that I noticed was the most critical part of this deck in all of my testing, is being able to get around blockers how to deal with Tristan's Ominous Shadows, Stalwart Shieldmates, Majestic Spirit, any of those cards. If you are ready to kill your opponent, mill them out. You materialize this, pay with a float, get a lash counter. You crack it and target their Taunter or Interceptor. And as long as you personally do not have True Sight, which nothing in this deck gives your champion True Sight, then you will be able to swing at the champion and go past their blocker. It's an amazing card, it's very strong, it's really good at getting around those situations and making sure that your kill turn is a kill turn. And you get to draw a card off of it too, so if you used a floating memory, it's a +1. It's awesome, awesome card. So Orb of Hubris is something that I added in one of my more recent iterations. As I was doing testing and playing at locals, I discovered that there were a lot of situations where I would often have too many interaction pieces. I was ready to be able to end the game. I'm sitting on 5 to 7 lash counters, and I just don't have my kill cards in hand. So Orb of Hubris costs 1. We can pay float, get another lash counter off of it, and then you draw 3 cards out of your deck, select 3 cards out of your hand, up to 3 in both instances, and you shuffle the cards back into your deck after you're done pitching whatever you don't want. So it's a better Orb of Regret. It gives Nico more resources, and it lets you sculpt your hand. It lets you dig through your deck, find what you're going to need in order to finish the game, and just take off. So very, very strong card. I really like including that. I've played it a few times. I don't often have to take it out, but when I do, it has been immensely helpful. So next up is Tithe Proclamation. You may be asking yourself why this card is included, and the answer to that is it costs 1, which is spending float to generate a lash counter. It draws you a card on enter, which replaces itself or gives you a +1 if you used a float for it. And then your opponent can't draw more than 3 cards, which is very good against Merlins or something like that. However, the biggest thing I use this card for is it's a great target for Fracturize. You can Fracturize it pre-recollection, then play Lost in Thought to draw a whole bunch of cards off of your floating memory in the graveyard, get a whole bunch of lash counters off of it, and then just go absolutely bonkers. Love this card a lot. So next up we're running Chalice of Blood. This is kind of a staple card right now. It's on the watch list. Any deck that's going to have as much health as we do with the Spirit of Serene Water is going to want to run Chalice of Blood, just because once you hit 20 damage you can bring this out, draw 2 cards. You know, it's amazing. And then after you've drawn the 2 cards you can banish your spirit and go back down. So it's super great. You have tons of resources and you can go off really quickly. Next up is Terrafring. These are the 2 0-cost Regalias that I run in this deck. They're the only 2 other than the Divine Relic GCR. Terrafring is just really strong as a defensive piece. Forces your opponent to pay 2 for every attack that they want to declare, and if they've been especially greedy and gotten low influence, you're able to use this and basically completely stall a turn. It's an awesome card. I really like it. I run it in almost every deck I play. Next up we have Magebane Lash, the crux of the whole Mercurial deck. Without this card I don't think Nico would be viable at all. Magebane Lash on enter gives you a lash counter, and if you paid 1 floating memory to materialize it, you'll get another lash counter off of Nico, and then it gets +1 power for each lash counter on your champion. It's a 0 power to begin with, but it's got 4 durability, so you can swing with it quite a few times before it'll break. I've never broken this because after 2 or 3 swings, the game is typically over. And another fun thing about Mage Bane Lash that's exclusive to Nico is anytime you take non-combat damage, recover 2. So what this means essentially is if you're facing a Diana and she's got like 6 Creeping Torments on you, you're at 20 damage, and you really want to draw 2 cards, you can utilize the Mage Bane Lash, just set it out on the field, and completely negate any damage from the Creeping Torment, because every time a Creeping Torment's going to proc, you're going to recover 2. So Creeping Torment does 2, you recover 2. Does 2, recover 2. And unless you have exactly 23 life and you've already used your spirit, they can't kill you with Creeping Torment. It's awesome. Love it. Love it. Last up is Vapor Jet Shield. This card is new to MRC and costs 2 to materialize. It's a unit link, so you can put it on an ally or your champion. End game, this is probably one of the last cards I like to materialize, or if they've got a lot of allies on board that are hitting for 1 or 2 damage, I'll bring this out early. It banishes 2 floating memory from your graveyard, which generates 2 lash counters and is awesome. Super strong card. Reducing 1 damage from all sources is very little, but it's basically a Storm of Thorns every turn, right? You are permanently immune to 1 point of damage from every source. So, phenomenal card. Love it. So that's our Mercurial deck. 12 cards, no big deal. So next up we'll go over the main deck options. This deck is something that I've been working on very heavily for the past few weeks since the set release. It is something that I'm pretty happy with. I won a locals this week and placed second in another locals with it, so I'm very pleased with the outcome so far. So we'll start off with the ally package. So firstly we're running 4 Stalwart Shieldmates. She's 2 cost, 0/2 blocker. She's got Taunt and Floating Memory, and she's the only Norm element card in this deck. I run 56 Water and no other Norm cards, because when I play Icebound Slam, I'm almost guaranteed to get the +5 damage off of that. And I'll explain that a little bit when we get to Icebound Slam. So, Shieldmate, very good blocker, very good floating memory card. Next, we've got 4 Wave Rider Protectors. I'm kind of on the fence about this card. It's amazing late game. It makes a phenomenal blocker in the late game. It's a 1/4 with Taunt and Floating Memory as class bonuses, and it costs 4 to play, which is the biggest drawback to it. Because it's a Guardian class bonus, if you see these in your opening hand, it's an immediate target for pitching off of the Glimpse. You can put these down into your memory early game to pay for costs on other cards and feel perfectly fine banishing them, because you're not going to get very much value out of them until you're on Nico, and at that point you don't want to have to pay for it to have the blocker, but it's helpful in situations where you need an extra meat shield. Then we have the Tried and True Frostborn Paladin. I love this card for this deck. It's a 3 cost, 2/3 with Intercept, and on enter you can banish a Floating Memory from your graveyard to draw a card and give it a buff counter. It is an amazing blocker. It's an amazing attacker. It refills your hand, and you can get a lash counter off of it. Huge value for this deck. If you're running a Water Nico deck and not running Frostborn, you're messing up. That's all I have to say about that. If you see one of these in your opening hand, that's fine. You typically don't want to see 2 though, in the opening hand, so I'd probably pitch the second one to dig deeper into your deck. The reason being, it's a little bit harder to set up floating memory in the early game, and you typically want to use some of your float to level up if you can. But if you do get one, it's not that big of a deal. You can draw more cards off of it and get additional value. So the last ally that I'm running is Snow Fairy. Snow Fairy is a 3-cost 1/2 with stealth, and on enter you can rest a target ally and it doesn't wake up until Snow Fairy is destroyed. This card is awesome. I use it to target shield mates, use it to target interceptors like Ace and Protector, boss monsters like Slime King, anything that's going to basically prevent you from dealing with your opponent or put you in a dangerous situation and potentially kill you is a target for Snow Fairy. It's an amazing, strong ally. However, I will point out that if your opponent gives vigor to your Snow Fairy target, it will wake up at their end phase. Snow Fairy only prevents it from waking up during the wake up phase at the beginning of their turn. So it's not as amazing as Dream Fairy, of course, but not much is. So that's our ally package. We're running 16 allies, 12 of them water, 4 of them normal. I'm pretty satisfied with that number. I don't think I'd go beyond that. I think if we did any more than that, it would be too many, and we'd be sacrificing a lot more of our other set pieces that are going to really help us with the game plan, essentially. So now we'll go into our interaction package, as I call it. We're running 2 Cerulean Decree, 3 Frostbind. Sorry about the glare, overhead lights and all that. We're running 4 Fracturize. So Cerulean Decree is a new MRC card. It costs 3, you imbue 3, and you can choose 2 of the 3 options instead of 1 if it's been imbued. And in order to imbue, basically you just have to, as you're paying the cost, you put those costs into memory face up to reveal that they're the same element as the card itself, which you should have very little problems with given the number of water cards in this deck. If you don't imbue it, it's not as valuable to you, but there still are situations where you have it in hand and you want one of the effects, so it's not necessarily a bad play in that situation. It's a fast speed card too, so you can play it pre-recollection and not feel terrible about it. So if you don't know what those effects are, number 1 is negate up to 1 target non-attack card activation unless it's a controller pays 2. So it's Frostbite. And then the second effect is up to 1 target unit's attack gets -3 until end of turn. Miniature resolute stand for 1 unit, sort of. Very good against like Diana, who's trying to come in with like a small taser shot or something like that for 3 damage. You can negate the on-hit effect of that and just be okay. Then the third effect, which is the one that I like choosing the most when I imbue this card, is draw card into memory. So it replaces itself, and you can just pick that up next turn. Super cool. I wouldn't run too many of them. I started this list with 4 in the deck, and I found that it was just too expensive most of the time. It's hard also to utilize it when you have a bunch of fractals out, because fractals do not count as imbue cost, so that's kind of lame. But still very strong, very good card. I wouldn't go lower than 2. I think maybe even going up to 3 isn't bad. Next we know Frostbind. It's a 2-cost fast speed. Negate target card activation unless its controller pays 2, and then banish the card if it was negated in this way. I used to only run Cerulean Decree at 4. Thought it was a little too expensive sometimes when I was only holding up 4 cards. Didn't want to show my opponent that I had Ravishing Finale in hand, so I couldn't imbue it and get the additional draw into memory. So I started running a couple copies of Frostbind. I'm up to 3 now, and I have 1 extra in the sideboard. I think there's just certain matchups where you really just want to be able to negate their stuff and not have them be able to do anything. So that's why we got that in there. And then we've got Fracturize. Everyone's favorite buddy. Fracturize is a 2-cost. Target item or weapon becomes a Cleric Fractal Fantasia with Reservable and loses all other abilities, and it's floating memory. If you mill this card off the top of your deck, you won't be sad. If you're in a Nico mirror, the first person to get Fracturize on the Magebane Lash will win the game. If you're playing against Tristan, Fracturizing the Windwalker boots will buy you a huge amount of time. You know, there's so many good targets this set, I think, for Fracturize. If you're playing against a potions deck, Fracturizing the Alkahest can really push them back in terms of their tempo. It's just a phenomenal card, and I would not run less than 4 of this in this deck. Very strong. Very capable of setting up amazing counterplays. So next we'll talk about some of the other cards that we're running that aren't necessarily fast speed or meant for interaction on your opponent's team, but they're still very good and they can impact your opponent in a number of ways. So we're running Chilling Touch at 4. So 1 cost, banish a random card from your opponent's memory until the end of their next turn, and then it goes back to their memory. And it's got Float. I love Chilling Touch. Playing 2 of these out of hand in the same turn to prevent your opponent from going to level 2 on the next turn is amazing. You can use it to deny your opponent resources to play cards if they're low on influence. Phenomenal. And it's got Floating Memory. Outstanding. If you mill this card off the top of your deck, you're super happy. It's not class bonus floating memory, so you can get so much value out of this card. It is very, very strong with Nico for sure. So then we have 4 Lost in Thought. This is another MRC card that I'm a really big fan of. It costs X. Then you may banish up to X cards from your graveyard with floating memory, and then you draw a card for each card banished that way. And it also has floating memory. It's a fast speed too, so you can play this pre-recollection for say 3, get 3 draws off of it, recollect, have a whole bunch of cards in your hand to just absolutely pop off. There's also the possibility of, because it's an X cost, you can just pitch it out of your hand to have a floating memory in your graveyard. Super amazing value possibilities off of this. The biggest Lost in Thought I've ever had was for 4 cards. So let me know if you guys can manage to pull off like a 7 draw with this. That would be insane. I would love to see that happen. So super great card, really happy that they printed that. And it generates lash counters for Nico. So now we'll talk about my fractal package. I've seen a lot of Nico decks that people have been putting out that use a ton of fractals, relying on utilizing refracting missile for damage. And my thought on that is I only run 2 Fractal of Intrusion. I know the on-enter is a big hit with some people. The on-enter lets you banish a floating memory from your graveyard. If you do, you look at your opponent's memory, their whole memory, pick a card out of there and throw it in their graveyard. This can be really strong for preventing your opponent from having interaction pieces. Like I played one yesterday against a Tristan and discarded her last Vanish from Sight, meaning that next turn I was guaranteed to be able to kill her. So it can be strong. I wouldn't cut it completely from the deck, but because it costs 3, and typically in Nico I found that if I don't play fractals in the early game, I don't want to play them at all in the late game. So other than Fractal of Intrusion, we're also running 4 copies of Fractal of Rain. I think this is probably one of my favorite cards from Mercurial Heart. This card alone can and does make Nico very strong. Fractal of Rain is a 2-cost fractal, so you can rest it to pay for card costs. It has Imbue 2, so as you play this, you put the 2 cards you're paying for it with face up in your memory zone, reveal that they're both water, and then it becomes imbued for the rest of the game. While it is imbued at the beginning of your recollection phase, you can choose either yourself or your opponent, and that target will discard the top card of their deck. In the early game, I use this exclusively to basically flip over cards from the top of my deck, mill myself for floating memory, hopefully, and just set up for the late game. Once you have enough floating memory, you're on Nico, you've got 5 lash counters, you've got 4 floating memory left in your graveyard, and your Mage Bane Lash is already out. You start milling your opponent with this, and it helps reduce the threshold that you need to reach in order to mill them out with Ravishing Finale. Very powerful card, very amazing card, and honestly, if I open my starting hand with 2 of these, I am so happy. If I start as first turn player, I see 2 Fractals of Rain, I'll imbue both of them and pass turn. Next turn, I'm still able to pay the same amount out of hand, and I can do like a GCR or get a Scepter of Lumina out and just set up for refilling my hand and just popping off. It's so strong. The downside is we don't really run Glimpse in this deck, so you can't set up to choose what it's going to mill. So you will have turns where you, games where you mill, 2 of your Icebound Slams, Ravishing Finales, things that you want to see in your hand instead of in your graveyard. But that's okay. All in all, it's going to afford you additional value. It's going to dig into your deck further, and because we're running 32 floating memory in this deck, the odds are, if you have 1 on field every other turn, you're going to be milling at least 1 float. So, very good, very strong card. And of course, since we're running fractals, we can't not run 4 refracting missiles, even though we've only got 6 fractals. The reason being, using Refracting Missile can, A, if it's getting milled, give you more float in the graveyard, or B, you can use this to ping your opponent for 2, 3, 4 damage, 1 damage even sometimes, if you just want the float in the graveyard and out of your hand, and it capitalizes on fast speed a lot. It can set you up for your late game very easily, especially if you're pinging for 4. It reduces that threshold for a Ravishing Finale and sets you up even further. So love that card. Also not class bonus locked, which is an issue I found in a lot of the water cards. So keeping away from class bonus as much as possible will only help us in the late game. So now we'll go to our defensive pieces. We're running Diffusive Block and Storm of Thorns, both of them at 3. So Diffusive Block is a 2-cost, fast speed. If you have a shield out, it costs 1 less. So if you have Vapor Jet shield out in the late game, you can play Diffusive Block for 1. And it prevents the next 2 damage to target unit. So you can use this to protect a shield mate, protect a Frostborn Paladin, protect your champion. It's only 2 damage, so it's not going to be a huge block, but it has class bonus float, so once you're at Nico, this adds to the value of the card and makes it even more useful to you. Storm of Thorns is just an amazing card. I think a lot of people have slept on this card. If your opponent's attacking you with 1/1s, 2/1s, 3/1s, something like that, you can actually Storm of Thorns. It'll prevent 1 damage from each source of damage for the turn, and then deal 1 damage back to any attackers. Absolutely amazing. Notably, it prevents both combat and non-combat damage, but it only deals 1 damage back if it's combat. Can be very strong, can buy you a whole lot of time, can help you clear boards. Super awesome card. And it has class bonus float, so when you're on Nico, even more value out of it. Love that card. Just going back a little bit, diffusive block, if you see this in your opening hand, think about pitching it. Sometimes you want to keep it if it's your only defensive piece that you drew, but I would strongly consider this a candidate for pitching because of the fact that it's class bonus float, so you won't get the full value out of it until later in the game, and you'd rather see that discarded off the top of your deck. Alright, so now we're going to get into what I like to call the finishing touches, and we're going to start off with something that may be a little controversial because it's typically been historically seen as a terrible card. So I'm running 3 title sweeps in the main board, and I have an additional copy in the sideboard. Nico has huge problems when it comes to getting around blockers. If your opponent has 2 shield mates out, we're only running 16 allies, and one of them does 0 damage and 2 of them do 1. So it can become very, very difficult at times to get around blockers, taunters, interceptors, all of those guys. Title Sweep completely negates that. It costs 6 to use, but it has that sweet, sweet cleave keyword that we need so badly, which is going to deal damage across your opponent's entire board to all their allies plus their champion. It deals 1 damage, but if you use it with Magebane Lash, you can get 5 to 7 damage off of it very easily, and then your opponent is going to mill off of the champion hit effect of Nico. So we can get a good amount of value out of that. If you see this in your opening hand, you have to consider basically the probability that you're going to see a bunch of blockers from your opponent. If you're playing against a Tristan, you want to see these in your opening hand so that you can hold them until they get to level 3 and you need to get past Ominous Shadows. If you're playing against a Sylvie, same situation, you want to hold these because you're going to see a lot of Baby Greys, you're going to see potentially Slime Kings, anything that's going to have Taunt or Intercept. You have to have these available to you when you need them. So I highly recommend keeping at least 1 in your hand if you see it in the opening. Otherwise, you run the risk of milling it off of Icebound Slam or Fractal of Rain, and that just would not be good. So make sure to protect your title sweeps. If you're playing against, say, a Rye deck or something that's not really going to use a lot of blockers or interceptors or allies in general, you can side these out. No big deal. And then we have the creme de la creme. What really makes this deck as fun as I think it is. We're running 4 Icebound Slams and 4 Ravishing Finales. These 2 cards alone are immensely, immensely powerful. Icebound Slam costs 7, has class bonus. This card costs 2 less, so if you're on Nico, you can play this card for 5. And it does 3 damage. On attack trigger, put the top 5 cards of your deck into your graveyard, and if you have 5 or more water cards in your grave, it does plus 5 more damage. So, turn 2, you can play this card, and if you've played any water cards in your last turn, you're going to be almost guaranteed to mill 5 more water cards into your graveyard. If you have any shield mates in your hand or on the field or in your memory, you're going to almost always get that plus 5. I have 2 games out of, I think, 10 or 12 that I've used Icebound Slam as the 2nd or 3rd turn of my game, where I hit 2 shield mates on the discard and didn't get the plus 5. So enormously powerful, and if you can get this off 2 turns in a row, it's 16 damage. It's insane. Like, your opponent is on the back foot immediately, they're terrified, they don't know what you're going to do next. Downside is that, of course, they can bring out Lantern to slow the tide of damage on this, but honestly, milling, even without the additional damage, milling 5 cards into your graveyard, again, 32 floating memory, you're almost guaranteed to see at least 2 float out of that. So huge value for this deck. Love Icebound Slam. Would never go under 4 copies of it. It's just so potent for Nico. And speaking of potent for Nico, we have Ravishing Finale. This card costs 3, and as an additional cost to activate it, you have to banish 2 floating memory. So if you have Magebane Lash out, you have 2 lash counters from that. If you paid for it with float, which you always should. You mill 2 additional float off of this, so now you're at 4 lash counters. Ravishing Finale does a base 6 attack damage, so with 4 lash counters, Magebane Lash plus this, you're dealing 10 damage for 3. It's an enormously powerful card just on its own in terms of the damage that you can deal. I frequently finish games just by playing this card and killing them with damage. If that doesn't do enough, the on-champion hit effect that you get as Nico from this card. Nico is the only champion that gets this effect. For each damage counter on the champion after this damage is resolved, you mill the top 2 cards of their deck. And this is in addition to Nico's on-champion hit effect, which mills a number of cards equal to the number of lash counters that she has. So if you're at 4 lash counters, you hit them for 10 with this, you're milling them for 24 off of just the damage from this. If you hit them with even 1 Icebound Slam, that's 40 cards out of their deck gone, just like that. You know, it's incredibly strong. You can do so much with this card, and if you see this in your opening hand, hold on to it. Do not let that go. Be careful about putting it in your memory if you're worried about any sort of memory hate from your opponent, or you're having to banish to level up. This is your game winning piece right here. So that's pretty much the main list. You have your 60 card main deck, your 12 card material deck, and then I will cover the sideboard real quick that I'm running. This sideboard is kind of just where I'm keeping cards that I'm testing out right now. I don't frequently have games where I actually sideboard anything. The reason being the main deck is just so potent that it's just really not necessary in most matchups. So just for the sake of brevity, I'll just go over a couple cards here real quick and just kind of explain what I've been thinking about as I've been testing them, and I'll let you guys decide whether you want to run them or not. So with the sideboard changes that came with MRC, we have 15 slots to work with Regalia and Material deck cards taking up 3 slots for each card in there. So with that in mind, I'm only running 2 Regalia cards in sideboard. I've got Viridian Protective Trinket because I noticed that water mirrors suck really bad without this, and especially Nico mirrors, if they get Fracturized off on Magebane Lash before I get Fracturized off on their Magebane Lash, we're basically dead. It dramatically reduces the potency of Ravishing Finale, Icebound Slam, just your ability to swing into them and have them mill additional cards, get a little bit of extra damage on board. I was running the Tidebound Claymore at one point. I found that card was okay, but typically I didn't appreciate it as much as I think some other people could because of this card here. Nullifying Lantern completely negates the secondary effect of Tidebound Claymore. Yes, it's a 5 power, 3 durability sword that costs Nico 1 because of the class bonus cost reduction of 1. However, the secondary effect of it, where you have to pay an additional 10 unless you have 10 water cards in your graveyard, this completely shuts that off, which means every swing with Tidebound costs 10, and that is just completely inconceivable for this deck. If your influence is ever above 10, you are either not playing enough cards on your turn, or you have just drawn so much off of Lost in Thought that you're ending the game now. Nullifying Lantern helps in those situations. It's also great against Erupting, which I haven't actually played against with this deck, but I have a very strong feeling that it will absolutely destroy Erupting, because you play just as fast as them and they're losing cards at the same time. It's amazing. So yeah, these two are the Material deck cards that I think I would keep in the sideboard, just for specific matchups and stuff like that. Please excuse the proxy. This is a title sweep because I've opened 10 boxes of Dawn of Ashes and only pulled one. I managed to trade for some other ones. Fourth copy of Title Sweep is there because there are decks that are going to flood the board a lot, and flood it with a lot of blockers, Swift Recruits, Ace and Protectors, Shield Mates, all of that stuff. So you have to be able to get through those, and sometimes you need 4 copies of Title Sweep in case you mill 1 or 2, and you need to dig to get to the 3rd or 4th. So, very good card to have. Another copy of Frostbind, just to round it out. There are some decks where I feel like I need a little bit more counter spells. That way we can interact with their plays and keep them from, just going crazy while we're still trying to set up. Not a bad include. We're running Morgan right now. I haven't actually been able to test her out and see if it does anything useful. It prevents your opponent from recovering when you're at level 2. She can kind of help in a way. I mean, her level 1 effect prevents all non-attack damage, all non-combat damage dealt to her. So it's really good for like decks that are going to Purge in Flames, just things that are gonna want to keep your board clear. I think this would be best against Arasana and Vanitas, because they're going to use like potions of healing a lot and recover herbs in order to just kind of keep their life totals manageable. And notably, if she's out on the turn you go for a killing blow with Ravishing Finale, your opponent can't lineage release their spirit in order to recover. So they would have to recover with their spirit in response to her activation, which can kind of throw them off at times, and not everyone has the same benefit that we have of banishing their spirit and still being able to access their base element, which is very nice. I'm running 2 copies of Fast Cure in the side right now. I haven't ever found a reason to side these in, and I'm probably going to toss them out at some point. I had 4 at one point, then cut it down to 2. It's a normal card, and I really don't like putting additional normal cards into the deck because it reduces the viability of Icebound Slam, and it's just not very helpful. But it does give Recover 4 and Floating Memory at fast speed for only 2 cost, so I don't know, we'll see. So after about 5 hours of recording and editing earlier today, I realized that the video recording had cut off right at the end of the side deck explanation. We covered the Fast Cures and how I was testing those out to see if it was any good in the deck, and then the recording just decided to cut off right when I got to Song of Frost. Song of Frost is a really interesting card because it can end the combat phase when it's played and then banish anything that's on the stack. So there's a lot of ways to abuse that interaction in order to like remove an opponent's spell shield or something that you don't really want to deal with, like a Resolute Stand or whatever. So it's a really powerful, really useful defensive piece, but notably it doesn't give us any float, and it also, because of the class bonus lock on the first effect, which allows you to banish a card with floating memory rather than pay its cost, we've run into a bunch of situations where it's kind of competing for the interaction slot in our turn with other pieces that we get a lot more value out of. So like for example, on the turn that you level up to Tristan, you take Agility 3, usually you're going to want to hold up a Frostbind or Storm of Thorns or Diffusive Block, something that's going to keep you chugging along a little bit and also provide some benefit to your late game, rather than playing this, which really just stalls a turn and costs you 1 influence. If you have enough fractals and you're at a point where your Lost in Thought is about to really come out of the gate swinging, then I could see argument for Song of Frost being useful in those situations. But for me at this point, I just don't feel like it offers as much value as a lot of the other cards that we're going to be using. So that's it for this deck tech video. I know it was a long one. Like I said in the beginning, I don't record videos ever. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not very good at editing, and a lot of this is probably going to be kind of a stream of consciousness, but I hope you guys enjoyed it anyway. I hope that you got some sort of usefulness out of this video and that it's going to assist you in your own deck building, your own testing. I hope I explained my thoughts on some of these cards well enough for you to kind of understand the mindset that I'm in when I go into testing this deck and what I'm trying to do each time I make a change to it. So I will include a link to my current list as of this video in the description, and I hope that this has been helpful. If you have any questions, you can shoot me a DM or just ping me in the main Grand Archive server. I'm at 1 red line, and I hope to see you there, or maybe sometime in a Yeti. Have a good one.